Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Savannah, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The summer of 1846 was unusually hot in Savannah. The humid air clung to the skin like a wet shroud, and the Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks seemed to droop lower than usual, as if burdened by secrets. It was during this oppressive season that a leather-bound journal was discovered hidden beneath a floorboard in the mayor's residence on Abercorn Street. The journal belonged to Eleanor Matthews, a distant cousin of Beatrice Langford, the mayor's wife. Eleanor had visited the Langford household in the spring of that same year. What she recorded in those pages would remain sealed in the Chatham County archives until 1965, when a fire damaged part of the building, forcing the relocation of numerous historical documents. Robert Langford had been elected mayor of Savannah in 1844, becoming one of the youngest men to hold the office at the age of 32. A third-generation Savannah resident, his family owned extensive property throughout the city and a plantation approximately 14 miles west of the historic district. According to the 1840 census, the Langford plantation listed 73 enslaved individuals. Among them was a man named Elijah. Only fragmentary records exist regarding Elijah's early life. He was born on the plantation around 1820, though no precise birth date was ever recorded. What distinguished him from other enslaved people on the property was a notation in the plantation ledger indicating he was skilled in letters. This unusual entry suggests he had somehow acquired literacy, a dangerous skill for an enslaved person in Antebellum, Georgia, where teaching slaves to read or write had been explicitly forbidden by law since 1833. By 1846, Elijah had been moved from the plantation to serve in the mayor's downtown residence. This transfer occurred shortly after Robert Langford's election. The mayor's household staff consisted of 8 enslaved individuals who maintained the 3-story federal-style home on Abercorn Street, just east of Forsyth Park. According to Eleanor Matthews' journal, Elijah primarily worked as the mayor's personal attendant, responsible for his wardrobe, correspondence, and other confidential matters. Beatrice Langford, née Williams, came from a prominent Charleston family. She had married Robert in 1840, at the age of 19, described in local newspaper accounts as a woman of exceptional beauty and refined sensibilities. Beatrice was known for her elaborate dinner parties and active participation in Savannah's cultural affairs. The couple had no children as of 1846. Eleanor Matthews arrived in Savannah on April 12, 1846. In her journal, she described her first impression of the Langford household as a home of apparent harmony, though there hangs in the air a certain tension that none dare acknowledge. Eleanor had come to Savannah to recover from an illness, hoping the coastal air would improve her condition. She stayed in the east wing of the Langford residence, which overlooked a small garden enclosed by a brick wall covered in climbing jasmine. On the evening of April 15th, Eleanor recorded her first observation of what she termed a peculiar exchange. She had been sitting on the second-floor balcony, partially concealed by potted palms, when she observed Beatrice in the garden below. According to Eleanor's account, Beatrice appeared to be waiting for someone, repeatedly checking the garden gate and adjusting her hair. At approximately 8:30 in the evening, Elijah entered the garden, carrying what appeared to be books. Eleanor noted that Beatrice's demeanor changed immediately. Her posture straightened, her hands trembled slightly, and she spoke in hushed tones that Eleanor could not discern from her position. The following evening, Eleanor deliberately positioned herself on the balcony again. This time, she observed a similar meeting, but with an additional detail that alarmed her considerably. I witnessed Mrs. L extend her hand to E, who took it with a familiarity that suggests this was not their first such contact. Eleanor's journal entries become increasingly detailed regarding these evening encounters, which she observed over the course of nearly 3 weeks. What makes this case particularly unusual is not merely the suggestion of impropriety between a prominent white woman and an enslaved man, though such a relationship would have been considered among the most severe transgressions in antebellum Southern society, but rather the documentation that followed. Eleanor Matthews did not immediately report what she had witnessed. Instead, she began to investigate. According to her journal, Eleanor searched Beatrice's private writing desk during an afternoon when the family had gone to attend a funeral. There, she discovered a small key hidden beneath the false bottom of a jewelry box. The key opened a compartment in the library's writing desk, where Eleanor found several folded papers containing what appeared to be poetry. The handwriting did not match Beatrice's flowing script, which Eleanor recognized from thank-you notes and invitations. Instead, the writing was more measured, precise, and notably different in style. Eleanor copied several lines into her journal. When night conceals what day forbids, we find ourselves as God intended, equal souls beneath unequal circumstances. On May 3, 1846, Eleanor's journal indicates she confronted Beatrice privately about her discovery. The conversation, as recorded, was remarkably candid. Beatrice reportedly admitted to having developed what she called a profound intellectual connection with Elijah over the previous 6 months. According to Eleanor's account, Beatrice had discovered Elijah reading one of her books, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, which he had taken from the library while cleaning. Rather than punishing him for this dangerous transgression, Beatrice had engaged him in conversation about the work. What began as a furtive literary discussion eventually evolved into regular meetings in the garden, where they exchanged ideas about literature, philosophy, and eventually their own lives. Eleanor's journal suggests that what initially shocked her was not merely the impropriety of these meetings, but Beatrice's apparent lack of shame regarding them. She speaks of this man as one might speak of a respected equal, Eleanor wrote, which is both remarkable and terrifying to witness. Eleanor recorded her own conflicted feelings, noting that while she found the situation morally perilous, she also observed that Beatrice seemed more alive, more present than at any other time. The situation grew considerably more complicated on May 12th, when Eleanor observed what she described as an exchange of profound intimacy in the garden. While her description is deliberately vague, the implication is clear that the relationship had progressed beyond intellectual connection to physical contact. Eleanor wrote that she felt duty-bound to alert someone to this dangerous situation. Yet she hesitated, caught between loyalty to her cousin and awareness of the potentially fatal consequences for Elijah. On May 15th, Mayor Robert Langford unexpectedly returned home early from a business trip to Augusta. According to Eleanor's account, he appeared distracted and irritable, suggesting he may have received some communication regarding affairs at home. That evening, rather than retiring to his study, as was his custom, he remained in the main parlor, seemingly watching his wife's movements through the house. Eleanor noted that Beatrice appeared uncommonly nervous, repeatedly checking the clock and glancing toward the garden door. At approximately 9 in the evening, Robert Langford announced he needed to attend to some business at his office and would return later. He left the house, but, according to Eleanor's observation from her window, did not proceed down the street toward his office. Instead, he circled around to the garden gate and concealed himself behind a large camellia bush near the wall. Eleanor's journal entry for that night is particularly detailed. She described watching from her window as Beatrice entered the garden at her usual time. Approximately 10 minutes later, Elijah appeared with a book in hand. They conversed quietly for several minutes before Robert emerged from his hiding place. Eleanor wrote that she could not hear the exchange that followed, but she observed Robert's face transform into something barely human in its rage. He seized Elijah by the collar and struck him repeatedly while Beatrice attempted to intervene. What happened next is documented not only in Eleanor's journal, but also in a report filed with the Savannah Constabulary the following morning. Robert Langford accused Elijah of theft, claiming he had discovered the enslaved man stealing books from his library. This public accusation obscured the true nature of the confrontation. Elijah was immediately imprisoned in the basement of the city jail on Bryan Street, where he awaited punishment. The next entry in Eleanor's journal, dated May 17th, describes a disturbing conversation with Beatrice. According to Eleanor, Beatrice appeared in her room before dawn, dressed for travel and carrying a small valise. "I have made arrangements," Beatrice reportedly said. "I cannot abandon him to Robert's vengeance. If you have any compassion, you will not speak of what you have seen until tomorrow evening." Eleanor recorded her own shock and attempted to dissuade Beatrice from whatever plan she had conceived, warning of the severe consequences should she be discovered aiding an enslaved person. Beatrice's response, as recorded by Eleanor, provides a rare glimpse into the complex emotions underlying this forbidden relationship. "I have lived as a possession all my life, first my father's, then Robert's. I understand Elijah's captivity better than anyone might suspect. We are not so different, he and I. The difference is that I now have the means to secure freedom for us both." By the morning of May 18th, the mayor's household was in chaos. Beatrice Langford had vanished, as had Elijah, who had somehow escaped from the city jail during the night. A senior guard was found unconscious, and the cell door had been unlocked rather than forced, suggesting assistance from someone with access to keys. Mayor Robert Langford immediately organized a search party, offering a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of the runaway slave who had abducted his wife. This public narrative that Elijah had kidnapped Beatrice rather than the two fleeing by mutual agreement quickly became the official version of events. It aligned with prevailing social attitudes that refused to acknowledge the possibility of a white woman willingly eloping with an enslaved man. The Savannah Republican newspaper ran a front-page story on May 20th with the headline, "Mayor's Wife Abducted by Literate Slave, Reward Offered." The search extended throughout the surrounding counties and up the Savannah River toward South Carolina. Eleanor's journal indicates that she remained silent about what she knew, though she expressed guilt about this decision. "I have chosen to protect B, though I fear for her safety and her soul. What awaits them cannot be happiness, as the world understands it." On June 2nd, a riverboat captain reported seeing a white woman and a black man boarding a northbound vessel at a small port approximately 40 miles upriver from Savannah. By the time authorities investigated, the pair had disappeared. The investigation continued throughout the summer of 1846, but no confirmed sightings were ever reported. Mayor Robert Langford, his reputation severely damaged by the scandal despite the official kidnapping narrative, withdrew from public life. He resigned his position in August 1846, citing ill health, and retreated to his plantation outside the city. According to county records, he died in 1849 of what was described as brain fever, though modern historians suggest this may have been a euphemism for suicide. Eleanor Matthews left Savannah in late June 1846, returning to her home in Charleston. Her journal ends with a final entry regarding the Langford affair. "I alone know the truth of what transpired in that garden. Not an abduction, but an escape. Not a crime against nature, but perhaps the only natural thing in an unnatural world. I will carry this knowledge to my grave, for there is no one to whom I might safely entrust it. The case might have remained buried in history were it not for the discovery of another document in 1958. During renovations of an old boarding house in Philadelphia, workers found a leather pouch hidden in the wall cavity of a second-floor room. The pouch contained several letters and a small diary. These items were eventually acquired by a private collector who donated them to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania in 1964. The diary belonged to a woman who identified herself only as BL. The entries begin in July 1846 and continue sporadically until October 1848. While the writer never explicitly confirms her identity as Beatrice Langford, several details strongly suggest this connection. She references my former life in S and the garden where we first spoke freely. Most significantly, she mentions E repeatedly, describing their life together in a small community of free blacks and abolitionists outside Philadelphia. According to the diary, BL had officially changed her name and was living as E's wife, though such a marriage would have had no legal standing at the time. She described learning to cook, sew, and perform other domestic tasks that had previously been done for her by enslaved workers. Far from lamenting this change in circumstances, she wrote that, "There is dignity in labor freely chosen that I never knew in leisure imposed by privilege." The diary also reveals that E worked as a carpenter and occasionally assisted with the Underground Railroad, helping other enslaved people escape to freedom. BL wrote of constant anxiety regarding discovery, noting that even here in the North we are never truly safe. The law would return him to bondage and mark me as something worse than dead. The final entry, dated October 23, 1848, indicates that the couple planned to leave Philadelphia for Canada, where British law would provide greater protection from the American fugitive slave laws. "Tomorrow we depart for a place where we might finally cease looking over our shoulders," she wrote. "E says we shall find a small house near water. He promises to build me a garden with a stone bench where we might read together in the evenings." No further documents have ever been found confirming whether Beatrice and Elijah reached Canada or what became of them afterward. They vanished from historical record, like countless others who fled bondage and persecution. The story of Beatrice Langford and Elijah Boone remains one of the most unusual documented cases of forbidden relationships in the antebellum South. While romantic relationships between white women and enslaved men were not unheard of in this period, they were rarely documented in such detail and even more rarely involved a woman of Beatrice's social standing. The case provides a rare glimpse into the complex power dynamics and human connections that sometimes transcended the brutal institution of slavery. Historians remain divided on how to interpret this case. Some view it as an exceptional love story that defied the constraints of its time. Others emphasize the inherent power imbalance between a wealthy white woman and an enslaved man, questioning whether genuine consent was possible within such a relationship. Still others focus on the broader historical significance of their escape, placing it within the context of resistance to slavery in the decade before the Civil War. What remains indisputable is the extraordinary risk both individuals took in fleeing together. For Elijah, recapture would have meant certain death. For Beatrice, discovery would have meant social death, complete ostracism, possibly confinement in an asylum, and eternal disgrace for her family. That they chose to accept these risks suggests the depth of their connection, whatever its nature may have been. In 1966, historian Margaret Wilson attempted to trace descendants of the Langford family to learn if any family stories about Beatrice had survived. She discovered that the family had actively suppressed all mention of the incident. Robert Langford's younger brother inherited the estate and systematically removed Beatrice's portrait, letters, and personal items from the family home. In family documents from subsequent generations, Beatrice was referred to only as Robert's wife, who had died young, with no mention of the circumstances of her disappearance. The garden where Beatrice and Elijah allegedly met still exists, though the house itself was demolished in 1912 to make way for commercial development. A small plaque installed by the Savannah Historical Society in 1993 makes no mention of the scandal, noting only that the residence of Mayor Robert Langford, 1844 to 1846, once stood on this site. The diary attributed to B.L. and Eleanor Matthews's journal remain in separate archives, their connection recognized by only a handful of scholars who have studied this case. The story they tell of forbidden connection across the most rigid boundary in antebellum Southern society offers a rare window into the complex human relationships that existed within and sometimes transcended the brutal institution of slavery. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of this case is what it reveals about freedom, not merely freedom from physical bondage, but freedom to choose one's own path, regardless of social constraints. Beatrice Langford abandoned wealth, status and security for an uncertain life with a man society deemed her inferior. Elijah risked his life for a chance at both physical freedom and emotional fulfillment. Their story reminds us that throughout history, individuals have sometimes rejected the rigid categories and hierarchies imposed upon them, choosing instead to recognize the humanity in one another. In Eleanor Matthews' final journal entry before leaving Savannah, she wrote, "I have pondered what I witnessed in that garden for many nights now. I cannot decide if what transpired between B and E was an act of madness or the only sane response to an insane world. Perhaps future generations will judge more clearly than I can." Nearly 120 years later, the full truth of what happened between Beatrice Langford and Elijah Boone remains elusive. Like the Spanish moss that still hangs from Savannah's ancient oaks, their story drifts between documented fact and shadowy conjecture, a reminder of how much of our history remains hidden behind official narratives, waiting to be discovered in forgotten journals, concealed letters, and the spaces between what is recorded and what is real. The Savannah Municipal Archives was renovated in 1968, and many documents were reclassified or relocated. Eleanor Matthews's journal was microfilmed and filed under personal accounts, visitors to Savannah, with no reference to the Langford case in the catalogue entry. The original journal was reportedly damaged by humidity and subsequently disappeared from the archives sometime in the 1970s. Only the microfilm copy remains, preserved in climate-controlled storage where few researchers ever request to view it. Some stories refuse to remain buried, no matter how deeply society tries to conceal them. The case of Beatrice Langford and Elijah Boone endures as a whispered counter-narrative to the official histories of the antebellum South, a reminder that human connection sometimes defies even the most rigidly enforced boundaries of race, class, and power. In 1959, a collection of letters was discovered during the renovation of a small cottage in St. Catharines, Ontario. The cottage, which had been abandoned since the early 1900s, contained a metal box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the main bedroom. Inside were 23 letters, all written in the same careful hand, dated between 1849 and 1861. They were signed simply B and addressed to "My dearest sister." The recipient's name and address had been carefully cut from each envelope, suggesting a deliberate attempt to protect someone's identity. The letters were acquired by the Canadian Museum of History, where they remained in storage, uncatalogued, until 1962. A graduate student researching the Underground Railroad discovered them while examining materials related to fugitive slave communities in Canada. The content of these letters provides what may be the final chapter in the story of Beatrice and Elijah. According to the earliest letter, dated February 3, 1849, the couple had indeed reached St. Catharines, a known haven for escaped slaves due to its proximity to the Niagara border and its active abolitionist community. "We have found a small cottage near the edge of town," Beatrice wrote. "E has secured work with a local builder, and I'm taking in sewing. Our neighbours are kind, though we have told them little of our past. We are known here as Mr. and Mrs. Brown." The letters reveal that life in Canada was not without challenges. Beatrice described learning to live with far fewer material comforts than she had known in Savannah. "The winter here is unlike anything I have experienced," she wrote in December 1849. "The cold seeps into one's bones. Yet when E returns home and lights the fire, I cannot imagine being anywhere else." She mentioned occasional illness, financial hardships, and the constant fear that someone from their past might recognize them. Perhaps most revealing are her reflections on her former life. In a letter dated July 1852, she wrote, "Today marks 6 years since we fled S. I sometimes try to recall the woman I was then, draped in silk and moving through rooms filled with silver and crystal. She seems a stranger to me now, a bird in a gilded cage who never understood she was not truly flying. The cage was beautiful, to be sure, but the sky is endless." The letters indicate that Beatrice and Elijah became involved with the abolitionist movement in Canada. They apparently opened their home to newly arrived fugitive slaves, providing temporary shelter and assistance in finding work. "E says we must help others as we were helped," Beatrice wrote in 1854. "Though we must be careful, for even here there are those who would return runaways for the reward money." A letter from April 1856 contains a startling revelation. "My dearest sister, I must share news that both terrifies and delights me. After all these years, when I had given up hope, I am with child. E is beside himself with joy, though I confess I am gripped by fear as well. What world awaits a child of our union? Yet even as I write these words, I feel the flutter of new life within me, and I cannot regret the path that has led us here." A subsequent letter from November 1856 announces the birth of a daughter, whom they named Hope. "She has her father's eyes and my chin, a perfect blending of us both," Beatrice wrote. "When I hold her, I feel that all our sacrifices have been justified 1,000 times over." E has built her a cradle with his own hands, carved with small flowers that he says represent the garden where we first spoke freely. The letters from this period reflect Beatrice's concerns about raising a mixed-race child in a world still dominated by racial prejudice, even in Canada. "We have told her she is special, born of great love," Beatrice wrote when Hope was 5 years old. "But I know the day will come when others will tell her she is something else entirely." E says we must prepare her for that day, though it breaks my heart to think of it. The most historically significant letter, dated January 8, 1861, mentions news from the United States. "Word has reached us of the secession of South Carolina. E believes war is inevitable now. He speaks of returning to fight should the North truly take up arms against slavery. I cannot bear the thought of him going back to that place, where a noose would certainly await him if he were discovered. Yet I see in his eyes the same determination I saw on that night in May so many years ago, and I know I cannot stop him any more now than I could then." The final letter in the collection is dated September 24, 1861. By this time, the Civil War had begun in earnest. Beatrice wrote, "E left yesterday to join a colored regiment forming in New York. I stood at our gate with Hope beside me until he disappeared from view. She's too young to understand why her father has gone, knowing only that it is something important. He is fighting for people like us," I told her, "for the right to be a family. I pray daily for his safe return, though I know many women's prayers will go unanswered in the years to come." There are no further letters in the collection. What became of Elijah, Beatrice, and their daughter remains unknown. Military records from the Civil War include several men named Elijah Brown who served in colored regiments, but none can be definitively identified as the man who fled Savannah with Beatrice Langford. The cottage in St. Catherine's changed hands multiple times after 1865, with no record of who sold it or where the previous occupants went. In 1967, historian Daniel Fraser published a monograph titled The Mayor's Wife and the Slave, Forbidden Love in Antebellum, Savannah, which attempted to piece together the various documents related to the case. Fraser's work drew considerable criticism from certain academic quarters. Some historians questioned the authenticity of the letters found in St. Catherine's, suggesting they might be clever forgeries. Others objected to Fraser's characterization of the relationship as a love story, arguing that the inherent power imbalance between a wealthy white woman and an enslaved man made genuine romantic love impossible. Fraser responded to his critics in the journal Historical Studies in 1868. We cannot judge the human heart solely through the lens of structural power dynamics. While we must acknowledge the context of slavery and its profound moral corruption of all relationships within that system, we must also leave room for the possibility that individual human beings sometimes forge connections that transcend, or at least exist in complicated tension with, the systems that seek to define and constrain them. In 1969, a researcher at the Savannah Historical Society discovered a small notebook that had belonged to the jailer who was on duty the night Elijah escaped from the city jail. The notebook contained a brief but significant entry dated May 17, 1846. Lady came with letter from Mayor. Said prisoner to be released to her custody for questioning at Mayor's residence. Letter had official seal. Not my place to question Mayor's orders, though unusual hour, released E.B. to lady's custody at approximately 11:30 p.m. This entry suggests that Beatrice may have forged a letter from her husband to secure Elijah's release, a detail not included in Eleanor Matthews's account. It also indicates a level of planning and determination that contradicts the impulsive elopement narrative that some historians had proposed. In the summer of 1972, construction workers uncovered a small cemetery on what had once been the outskirts of St. Among the weathered gravestones was one inscribed